Okay, so we're going to start off at the next one. I'm going to be running Loom, which is an adventure game from 1990. I'm going to be playing the VGA talkie version that was released in '92. If you're not familiar with this game, I'm going to show a quick video that what is Loom exactly about. So we're going to be talking to this pirate here in the Scum Bar from Monkey Island.
So, tell me about Loom.
You mean the latest masterpiece of fantasy storytelling from Lucasfilm's Brian Moriarty? Why, it's an extraordinary adventure with an interface of magic. Stunning, high-resolution 3D landscapes, sophisticated score and musical effects, not to mention the detailed animation and special effects, elegant point-and-click control of characters, objects and magic spells. Beat the rush! Go out and buy Loom today!
Jeez, what an obvious sales pitch.
Sorry, but on some topics I just get carried away.
All right, now that we've sort of gotten an idea of what Loom is we're actually going to go to the game itself. So we're going to be running this in DOSBox on expert difficulty, and we're going to. The time starts actually when I start the.
Please choose your skill level.
Whoa, that's loud. And this is very much a sound-based game, but I'm going to tell you how they ruined it at that point.
Please choose your skill level.
So we're going to start in 3, 2, 1. So first thing we do is we skip all the intro, and then we start running around in the game itself. So if you notice a lack of music in the game, it's because they decided that this is probably the second talkie game ever released on PC. They decided that the best way to put in all the speech into the game and all the sound effects is put it as CD audio. So they had to cut things from the actual game itself when they built this. So right now we're actually on Loom Island. So we're with the guilds here. There's this game originally came with a cassette or CD that had a 20-minute audio drama that tells you exactly what is the backstory of this game. So that's quite a sort of convoluted way. So there's going to be a lot of time walking around in silence, essentially, until we actually get somewhere. And that's sort of disappointing in this version of the game. And this is the most common version of the game that you can get right now. You actually can't get the older versions at all. So it is what it is. I'll have to come to another SGU with the EGA version, and we can actually enjoy the music as it was made. Okay, to skip cutscenes here, we're actually pressing escape. But there's a thing is I can buffer escape, so I'm holding escape here. And we're just skipping all the cutscenes without it ever starting.
It's heavier than it looks.
So the interface itself, instead of the usual point-and-click interface that you're used to actually from the LucasArts games, which has a verb list or a parser interface from Sierra, is that there's this little distaff, and we cast a bunch of spells which we use from the keyboard. We're running this in expert, so basically we only hear what the drafts are, so the spells that we're casting, and we have to learn each spell or draft first before we're allowed to use it. So if you actually had the last draft that you need to beat the game, we could actually just automatically go and beat the game right there in that scene. The cycle limit, it doesn't really make any difference, at least in my experience, unless you overclock it to too high, in which case it actually gets slower. So you can run this, actually the best right now is you go and buy this on Steam. You do not buy this on GOG, unfortunately. You buy this on Steam, and then you can speedrun it through the Steam executable, which is a native Windows executable. So I just have a weird pet point is that I'm running this via DOSBox off the original CD. Unfortunately, the PCs that are supplied today do not have optical disk drives. And if they do have optical disk drives, they actually spin down, so we lose time to when we... no, don't go over there. When we use modern CD systems, because they spin the CD down, and every time we actually have an audio cue, it'll have to spend the time to spin the CD back up again, and then it'll spin it down again. So it's really slow. So we actually have to run this on DOSBox via a CD image. So right there, we just opened up the sky. There's actually a hint that exists in the next area, which we're going to, where we're going to actually learn our first draft, and then this is actually sort of the key point where the speed run really begins. This is where we know what our RNG seed is for this run. So there's the RNG here is set actually in the beginning of the game. So when you start it and you skip the opening cutscene, the RNG seed is set. And then we know exactly where we are in the RNG. So there's 4 different routes in the VGA version. And it basically tells us that there's a set list of drafts that we know beforehand. So we can actually skip drafts and actually watching what the different animations are in them.
There's an owl in there.
Yes, there's an owl in there. The voice acting isn't that fantastic, but you have to consider that this is probably the second voice-acted game,
Another owl.
the game that we have. So I need to listen here in and see what our draft is.
Oh, there were so many owls in these woods.
So this tells us that I'm on, at least according to my notes, we're on draft route number 2. So our draft for night vision is DCCD. And that means that we can either press on the keyboard DCCD to actually, hey, come on, transition now, to actually use night vision, and that we can see in the dark. So now I know all my drafts up until the very end. I don't actually have to learn them, except that the game requires that you learn them. Now, compared to the world record route, there's a slight deviation that I do now. And this is because it's a potential soft lock if you go into this 10th second. So what we're actually doing here is this island is meant to more be sort of lore-based, and that it tells you what the lore is and
I hate that color.
and what exactly the lore is, and give you a tutorial on picking up these drafts and using these drafts. So you're actually forced to learn to use these drafts and everything. So if you don't actually use these drafts after you learn them, then you just don't actually get the next note, and you can't actually advance off the island. So here we go. Here now, we remember we just learned night vision. We have to wait until Bobbin stops. We do DCCD. You can also use QWERTY as your base to learn or cast the drafts, or you can click on the staff, but clicking on the staff is slow, and because we're speedrunning, we don't click on the staff. So now we learn straw to gold. And because it's faster, we just turn the gold into straw. And now we actually get our new note, our first note upgrade, so we learn F. Beep. And you can imagine playing this with a PC speaker must have been fun. And there's actually, but the music is much, much better in the EGA version of this game because it actually has music. Yes, we learned F. F's in chat. So now we're actually leaving Loom Island. We're going to be probably spending a bit of time just roaming around and getting out of here. So the story is that we are of the clan of weavers who used to make cloth and whatever not, but they turned out to be the biggest spellcasters and the most mystical of all of the guilds. So we're on our way. There's a bunch of swans that are following us, and that's if you learn the story, then you know where you are. That they're all the other weavers.
I think that's closer.
Oop, probably had the wrong one.
Twisted it tighter.
So if every time I cast a draft wrong, so I cast that in the wrong direction. So the thing is you can reverse these drafts. So the twister itself is F, D, D, E. But if you cast that in reverse, so E, D, D, F, it untwists. So there's a lot of cases where we're going to do that. Now we learn G. Yeah, it's a couple seconds, and then we learn G. Beep. And now we're off. So this is the island that has the shepherds as well as the glassmakers on it. So now we're going to go see the shepherds, and they're gonna make fun of us.
Going somewhere.
So now we. Hey, where are you going?
Come on, lad.
Come on. So we actually learned the invisibility draft there while they came up, but we just skipped the cutscene. So, but we know all the drafts beforehand, so we don't actually have to do that. So it's funny that every time there's sort of a transition, your cursor disappears and you have no idea where your cursor is. So now we're going to go see the Glassmakers. And we have to learn more story points here. But in order to learn the next draft that we need to get past the shepherds, we need to cast invisibility on these guys up here. And we know that this draft is okay because we just learned it. So this is the first part of the 2 new skips that we just figured out recently, is that we can just start that cutscene by trying to leave, and then the cutscene starts, so we don't actually have to manually trigger the cutscene. The next one that comes up later, and both of these save about 30 seconds compared to the old routes. So this game is a good example of execution and routing, rather than bugging things out to no end.
Doozy.
Aristine Bishop Mandible cuts quite a figure, doesn't he? I don't doubt the Crucible's getting tired of bowing and why would the clerics want a scrying sphere anyway? I thought.
Here we go. We're going to go look at the scrying sphere, that scrying sphere which tells us of the future, and this just tells us that we're going to cast a draft known as Terror, which in this case is DFFD, and that's going to get us past the shepherds. And then suddenly he turns into something horrible, which then makes the shepherds run away. There are a lot of optional drafts that you can actually learn in the course of this game, but we don't do that because that's slow. And the optional drafts actually add a bit more story or let you do other things, or even, so for example, the scythe here has sharpen. And there's another point of the game where you're going to be using, you could use normally sharpen or unsharpen, which is the actual draft that we would use in that case to get past that part of the game, because it's sort of a puzzle adventure game, but not really. It's really linear, but you can get stuck unless you forget to take notes. So now we learn Terror. We're going to go back and scare the shepherds. So there's multiple solutions to some of these puzzles. So there you can use multiple drafts on various different objects that'll do something. Oh, I almost forgot. If you remember when we left the island before we got onto the stick, then there was a seagull there. And if you play some of the later LucasArts games, like Monkey Island, which came out half a year after this game, there's in the credits it says "Seagull appears courtesy of Loom," and that was the seagull. The other thing is that the main character is called Bobbin Threadbare. So there's many conditions in later LucasArts point-and-click games where they actually reference this. So it's like, I'm Bobbin Threadbare, are you my mother? And then that's a reference back to Loom. So now we turned into a dragon, and the shepherds got scared. But we get rid of the shepherds, and we get to the next guy. So if you go here, it looks like there's nothing here, but you can actually go into the background here, and there's another hut. If you wake that guy up by clicking the sheeps, you learn the awaken draft, which is completely useless, actually. And then he gets angry at you, the sheeps go over, and then they cast sleep. But we're going to go to this hut where we're going to meet the leader of the shepherds. I forget her name. And we're going to go look at a little lamb and then learn a draft called Heal, which we'll use later. This is actually one of the first instances of learning a draft where we don't have the correct notes yet.
She doesn't look at all well.
And the reason why the VGA version is slightly slower than the EGA version is because we can't skip any of this dialogue. There's actually a speed up debug mode that you can find in ScumVM as well as the original game. And the thing is that if you use that, then every time there's an audio cue, there's talk, or then you play a note, then it will actually pause the scripts happening, and everything will slow down until the audio cue is done. So now they're worried that come on. The sheep are going to be eaten by the dragon, but we remembered we learned a draft that dyes things grass green. We hate that color. Now all the sheep are green. Now the dragon comes and eats us. RIP headphone users. Sorry. That's really bad. And that's the most horrible sound effect in this whole game. I dislike it. We're going to hear it again, which is great. Come on. So now we learn the next note, which is A. So you can go, ah! And now the option is actually the casual way is to cast sleep on the dragon, but we learned terror, so we can just use terror instead. So now we turn actually into fire, and now the dragon gets scared of all the fire, and because we turned all the gold into straw, then we can actually get through here. So now here's the maze, which is not actually a maze. It's very simple. There is actually a bit of RNG that's involved in the maze construction itself, but the way that we've experienced it, if you go exactly the same way, you'll always end up in exactly the same spot. So there's not really RNG. So we go down the stairs here. We take this first door that we come across, and then we go over to the right side of the screen. Hey, no. That actually happens if you click too far to the right side of the screen. It'll actually backpedal because it's thinking that you're clicking on the left side of the screen. So we're like, why? But we're coming up to the first, or the next major skip, which was found recently, so within the past 2 weeks or so. And this actually saves 20 seconds. So instead of actually sitting there and learning the draft reflect, we can actually go and we start the animation for the reflect draft, and then we just disappear because the game has already put us in a state where we know that we know the draft and we can use it later. So instead of going in the first door here, you go to a path on the left, and then you get in here. So now we're going to have the new best sound effect in the game. You were warned. So now we learn reflect
Guess we'll
here.
be going back that way.
Now we saw the water drop, and that's enough to learn reflect. And then we go into the most difficult part of the game, which is clicking into the back of this area here. And we got through that fine, which is great. So the next thing is we're going to go through this tunnel, and then we're going to come back out. So now there's a joke here if you actually click on this and listen to the description. But we're not going to do that. Repair costs are spiraling or something like that. But we can just untwist this stupid staircase, and then we can just get past it. So the next bit is now we're going to pass on to the Blacksmith Guild. So we need to get into the Blacksmith Guild, and let me just check what my reflect draft is. And there's the dragon. The dragon's going to be angry at us, and we're going to get to go know Rusty in a moment. Rusty is this guy here. We need to copy him, so we're actually going to use the reflect draft on him. But the thing is that the first time we use it, it just wakes him up, and then we get a bunch of story. Here's that. And then we have to wait until we get back control because we're waiting for the audio cue to end. Because that's the way this game was programmed. The best thing about Rusty is that he gets eaten by the dragon because the dragon thinks it's us. But that's okay. We'll see Rusty again later. And this game originally was a series was thought to be like they could make a couple sequels, and Rusty would have been the protagonist then of possibly the second game. They were just never made. Now we're going to have a bunch of clinking sound. This is not fun. But now we're going to get in here, and then we're going to advance the story. So now we say hi. We brought this stick. Then we take a nap.
That straw looks awful.
And then Rusty gets eaten, and we turn back into ourselves, and apparently something happened. And then we get our distaff back in that cutscene. And then we can use open, which is the default draft on the door, and we can actually get out. Now we're going to go and learn about the bad guy again. So Bishop Mandible is the OG bad guy of the story. And so we have to be precisely right here to start when this dialogue starts, and then we have to listen through this whole dialogue.
The final blade is even now in the hands of our most skilled blade shaper, Your Excellency. How's it coming there, Edgewise? I'm just putting the edge on the last sword, sir.
And one of the reasons is that where Scum VM is actually currently not allowed in VGA runs is that it makes things really weird because you can do stuff in Scum VM that you can't do natively in either the Steam version or this version. So now instead of unsharpening the sword, we're going to just twist it. And if we miss this, it's a 30-second time loss. Come on. There we go. Now we have a bunch of cutscenes. Then we get to meet the Church's Island, and then we get to meet Cobb. Say hi to Cobb, chat. And Cobb wants to know what's under our hood, and by legend, if you look under the hood of a weaver, you die. And if you actually watch this cutscene, he dies. now we're going to go listen to the great master plan of Mandible if this guy would actually walk through the door. And now actually Mandible gets eaten because Chaos comes and from the rift that was opened, and now Chaos is the bad guy. So the idea is in the story is Bishop Mandible wants to command an army of undead, and then, oh great, best sound effect in the game. Yeah. And now we can either use heal, or we can use close on these rifts. But we have to close all the rifts in order to progress. But the thing is that out of all the rifts, only this one actually has anything that we're supposed to do with it. So now we're going to meet up with Rusty again. Come on, go in. So we go over to the body. So because the boundary between the dead and the living has been broken because of these rifts, then Rusty comes out and we can heal him and he disappears. So now we're going to heal up this rift. Now we have to visit all the other rifts because we have to know what's exactly going on in there. But the best part is because it's a speed run, we don't have to care about any of the dead bodies. We just leave them as is. Who cares? So like, look at all those dead shepherds. We're late, wizard. Yes, but instead of actually healing the shepherds, we can just leave them there to die. You know, get on with the mission. Isn't that the most important thing? Next, we go into the, so this is sort of like a revisit now, is that we're going to go back to the glass blowers, and the main glass blower is actually dead. We don't actually heal them, but if we go in, there's a little bit of story, but again, somebody's dead, who cares? So we continue onwards. And then we heal the rift. And then if you actually take account of the story, now we're going to go visit Swan Lake. The actual music of this game, you know, the one that you can't hear. Oh, by the way, we're going to learn B now. Music of this game was originally inspired by Swan Lake. It was transcribed to MIDI by George Alistair Sanger, who's also known as the Fat Man. And he actually transcribed the music into MIDI, but we won't hear any of this because they wanted to get speech instead of music into this game. So we get here, we see all the swans. There's our mom there in the foreground. That's story. And then instead of actually listening to story, we're going to go back to Loom Island and then go finish up here. So we're only about a minute or so away. So we go back and we see the great loom, which is weaving the fabric of space and time and whatever. So instead of the walk of shame on the big corridor, actually we can get now through here, and we can just walk back left, trigger the cutscene, and now we need all the various FGA. So now we need all the various drafts, which Chaos just used in reverse, but we have to learn them. So first, then we have cook, so we have to uncook. Okay, that didn't go right. We just messed that up. We need to wait until he puts the staff down, and then we can try again. And then the last draft that we actually learn here that Chaos uses is unmake, so we take that to the loom. Now we've actually destroyed the loom, and we've just destroyed the way that Chaos is going to be. Now we learn high C, which is the last note that we learn. And that way we can cast the last draft in the game, and then we can end the game. So the last draft of the game is Transcendence, which turns us into a swan. And then we get to join our Weaver compatriots as a swan, and blah, blah, blah. And then more story in the sequel that was never made. So we target ourselves, C, F, G, C. And time is on the last note. There we go. Bad time. But that's okay. And that's the game. And now you actually get to listen to Swan Lake, which is actually on CD audio on the disc itself. And the rest of the game was extremely silent. But another marathon, another time. And now you get to see the credits, and the scythe that was thrown in is now the moon. So up next, we have a lot of interesting new games that were just added to the schedule. So Resident Evil Survivor is next. So stay tuned for that. And yes, the person who did the graphics is the same guy that does Sam & Max. He worked for LucasArts back then. But thanks, everybody. Join us on the Speed Adventures Discord if you really want to learn any speed adventure games and speedrunning any adventure games. And enjoy the rest of the marathon. There's just today left.